Welcome to Paranormal Heart Podcast with host Kat Ward. Welcome back, folks, to Paranormal Heart Podcast. Tonight's segment is pre-recorded, streaming on United Public Radio Network 107.7, New Orleans. I'm your host, Kat Ward. Thank you so much for tuning in. I have a couple things that I want to mention before I introduce my special guest. I'd like to mention that Paranormal Heart Podcast is for entertainment purposes only. All information shared in this podcast is not professional advice. The views and opinions expressed on Paranormal Heart Podcast are not necessarily those of the show host, network, or producers. And I'd like to give a special shout out to a friend of mine, two very special souls that I had the honor in meeting, Mike Rood and his service dog Spark. Mike is ex-Canadian military who's been given a malaria drug called mefloquine. This drug proved to have some really nasty side effects such as hallucinations and intense dreams, among other side effects. Mike and Spark are driving across Canada, bringing awareness to this drug's toxicity. So if you're interested in finding out more about Mike, Spark, and their special journey, check out his podcast. You can find it on YouTube called the Rude Awakening Tour Podcast. Folks, I have the great honor in bringing back my special guest. He's author and two-time witness of Sasquatch encounters and veteran field researcher of these elusive creatures. I'm tongue-tied. William Jevning. Currently, William is a host and creator-host of the very popular podcast called The Creek Devil and participated in an episode of the History Channel's America's Book of Secrets. The episode was called The Mystery of Bigfoot, and he continues his field work and has many contacts across North America. So on this segment tonight, William will be discussing his encounters and research of this very well-known and elusive creature. So please help me welcome William Jevning. Again. Hi.
Again. Don't we love technology?
Oh, gee. Those who tune into my show regularly know that I have issues with technology. And yeah, that it was no different today.
You're not alone. I have problems all the time with it too. And I am not a tech person, so it magnifies the problems.
Neither am I. I can fix some of them, but I have a tech guy that I contact later on. It's like, Brian, I don't know what's going on. So thankfully he helps whenever he can. But so thank you so much for being back, Will. It's been a few years, like we mentioned earlier.
I appreciate it. Yeah,
so do I.
Well, I guess
go ahead.
I'm going to just kind of dive in there.
Yeah.
I guess, what got me into the topic, and I'll try not to go too deep into it because I can talk a long time on it, but there's plenty of other things to talk about. I guess originally, I found footprints first time in 1972 when I was 14, but I had to back up and think afterwards, after that find and then the encounter, there were actually a couple of incidents that happened prior to that, looking back, they had to be Bigfoot. They couldn't have been anything else. And they were in 1968, we lived on the Puyallup River on 40 acres. And we lived at the very back on this dirt road. It was, I don't know, half a mile, 3/4 mile long. And there were only two other homes on the road. One was an elderly lady who lived next to us, but you couldn't see her house from ours. And then there was a couple that I think they were middle-aged, and they kind of stayed to themselves. So it was a pretty quiet area, not much ever going on back there. And what's funny, it's almost identical today going back there to what it was in the late 1960s.
Oh, really? Wow.
It's almost like a time warp. I was able to go back there and take some pictures of some things, and it still looks identical to what it did when I was a kid. But So anyway, the two incidents, I believe, happened both the same time, same year, 1968. The first one would have been, it had to be during the winter time or maybe the spring. We were watching TV one evening, and like I said, our house we had some really big pastures in the front of the house, so you couldn't see the other houses from our property the way the trees were set up there. So you could see the driveway went a long way around to our place. And one night I saw this light coming, and it was moving too slow to be a car, too fast to be somebody walking with a flashlight. So pretty soon we hear this pounding in the door, and there was this kid there about my age. And because the school district was very small, the town was small, had I graduated there would have been 35 of us in the class. So I knew everybody my age in the town. And I didn't know who this person was, this kid was. So he was just terrified. He said the rock quarry monster tried to get him. And I'm thinking, rock quarry monster, what's he talking about? Because a couple of years before, I'd run square into a bear out in the woods within 5 feet. And thankfully, it went after the beehives instead of us kids. So, but, I knew what was out there. And a bear would have been, my thinking, the only thing that would have been any real threat out there. So he said he thought it was a man coming after him. And then when it got out onto the road, he saw it was this big, gray, hairy monster. So he took off on his bike tour, ended up coming to our house. So my dad came out, found out who he was staying with. He was grandparents. He was from out of the area. So my dad took him to his grandparents' house and came back. And my mom said, well, what's this rock quarry monster? And my dad says, it's just some old hermit hanging around up the rock quarry. So I didn't think anything of it. That was it. So later that summer, I'm out riding my bike, which I did all the time. I lived on my bicycle. My mom and 2 younger sisters come out and they said, hey, come here and take a look at this. So I come up they were out by the barn, and normally our cows are way in the far pastures during that time of day, every day. The cows have a routine they do, but they were all inside the barn, huddled with their heads poking out and ears, on alert. And I looked over to where they were looking, and here's the tree line. The brush was so thick back there, it was super, super thick. And it was just being thrashed horribly in this one area. Something really big was in there thrashing this brush. And I said, well, maybe the bear came back. It's the only thing I could think of. We never heard the word Bigfoot or anything like that in those days. In fact, all the way up, we moved out of that valley in 1970, just 4 miles away, but outside that area. And in 72, when I was 14, my friend Mark came over and stayed the weekend, and it snowed. So we got bored and we decided to go to our friend John's house. And he lived about a half mile away. So we couldn't find the trail through the woods. So we walked down the road and up the railroad tracks that went right in front of John's house. We got about 3/4 of the way there on the tracks. And we found some guts, animal guts, laying between the rails. And everything was covered with snow except the rails. And there was no footprints of any kind in the snow anywhere. The snow was pristine. So we're thinking, how in the world did these get here? It just didn't make any sense. And it was the size would have come from, say, a medium-sized dog or a coyote, something like that. So it was kind of a decent-sized amount. So we could see off to the right through the trees. There was a big field there, no tracks there. Obviously, nothing the way we came. So I told Mark, I said, will you walk up and ahead and I'll climb this embankment to the left. I'll see if there's anything up there. So I got up there, and here are these big human-looking bear footprints in the snow all over the place. I said, hey, Mark, come and look at this. So we're standing there kind of oohing and awing and scratching our heads. And it was below freezing temperature that night. So the guts weren't frozen. So instantly we knew that whatever did that was really close by, and that scared us. Yeah. So we took off running to John's house, and John, he had 2 younger brothers, 2 younger sisters. So when we got in the house, we're all excited. Everybody broke into a panic, and it was just pandemonium. So John's dad was retired Navy, and he come out of the back room and he says, boys, knock it off. What's going on? And so we told him, and he grabbed a .45 pistol and a camera, and he says, take me back there and show me what you found. So this whole gaggle of kids goes back there, and John and I were talking recently. We're pretty sure that the kids, all of us, destroyed most of the footprints before his dad could get all the pictures, but he did get some. And then he proceeds to tell us what he thinks it is. And I don't know if he read something in Argosy magazine, or because that's about all that was out in those days. Those type of magazines, had those stories in them. Yep. So we're thinking, wow, we love Universal monster movies. So there's real monsters out here in the woods. You're kidding. So that excited us. So we're out looking every weekend for months, and we didn't find anything again. So, you get bored and off to other things. And so fast forward to 1972 in December. No, I'm sorry. Fast forward to 1974, 2 years. So my dog, my collie, we had to tie him up to his house every night because he liked to go roaming the neighborhood farms at night, and we didn't want him getting into trouble. So he was barking like crazy this one dusk evening. And my dad always said, well, if any animals come in the yard, and there was always skunks and raccoons and all kinds of stuff coming in there. Elk even used to come down to eat with the cattle.
Oh, so, wow. Really?
Oh, yeah. It was very rural in that area. So lots of wildlife there. And so I grabbed it because he said the animals, coming in the yard might be rabid, and we didn't want them biting the dog or the cats or anything like that. So I grabbed a 22, a single shot 22 with a couple of bullets. And I grabbed the dog. I said, go get him. And off to the tree line, we went out towards the barn. Well, I'm about 50 feet behind him. And he gets to the tree line and he freezes. And his ears are up and his tail's up. And he's just standing there staring intently. And as I approach him, he wheeled around and ran past me like a bullet. And I'm watching him thinking, what's that dog doing? Yeah. So he gets back to the house, and I thought, well, he'd gotten into a porcupine pretty bad prior to this. So I'm thinking, well, maybe the porcupine's in there again, and he learned his lesson this time. Of course, he didn't. That's what ended his life, but he got into the porcupine again. But so to give you an idea what the place looked like, the grass, it was about 3 feet tall or so, field grass. And this would have had to be October because we were getting frost every night, and that was just about hunting season weather. So, and that part of the tree line was mostly fir trees. So the tree limbs were hanging down into that grass. And inside the tree line, there was a big maple tree. And the maple tree, the trunk was probably 3-4 feet across. It was a really big old one. Yeah. And so I knew there was a clearing in there. So I had the rifle in one hand, and I'm pushing my way through the tree limbs. And as I cleared the tree limbs under this tree, on the left side of the tree, I see this massive thing standing there, moving the leaves around with its right foot in the leaves. And I'm just like, you freak out. I mean, people say, well, you're so calm talking about it. Well, it was 50 years ago. I mean, I've had a lot of time to absorb this. So, yeah. But it just scares the living hell out of you. In fact, I still have dreams every once in a while about that time period. Oh, wow. And that incident. But when it saw me, it stopped. And so we're standing there 20 feet or less from each other, kind of just staring. And I thought, oh my God, what is this? And all these things go through your mind. And the only thing I thought was, how am I going to get out of this one? I need to get away from that. And it was massive. It was, I was 16 at the time. So I was probably about 5'9" or so. And it was at least 2 feet above me. So I'm estimating around 8 feet, 4 to 5 feet across the shoulders. And from the front to the back, a good 3 feet thick. It was just huge. And it was like a tree trunk. It was solid coming down its body. And I thought, well, let me shoot in the air. Maybe it'll scare it away. So I shoot in the air, didn't move, didn't do anything, no reaction. So from my right rear, I hear some noise behind the brush. Here comes another one walking around. It stands by the first one, and it's about a head shorter and proportionally smaller. That was it. I freaked out and took off running.
I would imagine.
So my sisters that everybody had made fun of us for finding the footprints 2 years before, so I wasn't going to say a word. So I get on the phone and I called John, told him what happened. So we agreed, all of us, we'd go meet at my house before daylight the next morning with our hunting rifles, and we would track them. And that's what we did. There were, I think, 5 of us that went. And we followed these tracks in the frost until I'm guessing around 10 in the morning or so, whenever the sun came out and melted the frost, and we lost the trail. I don't know what we thought we were going to do if we found them. But,
With what? With 2 bullets remaining?
Oh no, we brought our hunting rifles this time.
Okay.
So we were ready, but I used to hunt with a 300 Savage, and I don't know that's essentially a 308 round. I don't think that would have been much use against something that size anyway. So we didn't talk about it outside of us. People who were involved in that, and rarely. So I think John and I were either playing baseball or basketball after school. And we were riding the activities bus home one evening. And because it was so rural, there were maybe 6 kids on the whole bus, and everybody's all spread out. So John and I are sitting towards the back. He's behind me, and we're talking real quietly about this. And one of our friends, I swear, he had bat ears because he could hear us from where he was across, and he was a nice guy. Just he was somebody who was really, really small guy and kind of an introvert. So he didn't really have many friends, and he stayed to himself. But he knew us, and he comes over and sits down. And he says, "Can I interview you about that?" And I'm thinking, well, with Jim, it won't go anywhere. He won't tell anybody. So I tell him what happened, and then I don't remember how long it was. Within a couple weeks after that, he gave me John Green's first 3 books, the first 3 that he wrote, that kind of look like magazines.
Okay.
And I'm kind of oohing and awing, thinking, wow, I didn't know there was so much stuff on this subject. And so I, spent the next few months poring over the books. Well, that summer of 1975, I was sleeping in my room. I don't know, I guess growing pains or something. I was sleeping. Normally I was out doing something. So one of my sisters comes into my bedroom and she says, "Hey, there's two men here to see you." And I'm thinking, two men? What are you talking about? I only know my uncles or my dad's friends. I don't know any men, you know. So I walk out the back door, kind of groggy, and I see Rene Dahinden walking up to the back door. And, you know, of course, in the 70s, anybody that's in a book you assume is automatically famous, right?
Yeah.
So I was a little bit starstruck by seeing him. And then there was another guy from one of the other towns, another Bigfoot hunter that was there by the name of Dennis Gates. And so Rene told me that, you know, my friend had written to John Green. They were in the Puyallup area just 7 miles away from us, investigating the whole Puyallup screamer stuff. And yeah, he talked to me about what I'd seen, then said, "Hey, you know, why don't you come up and stay at the camp for a couple of days and you get to meet everybody." So we did. And, you know, Green and Dahinden wanted me to be their contact in the area and help them out. So I thought, well, shoot, I'm, you know, 17-year-old kid. If I can help, why not? You know, so that's how I really got involved
exciting.
in all this. So it was, you know, and I followed Dahinden around all night when they were doing the investigations, and Gates packed the biggest rifle I think I've ever seen. So I'm thinking at any moment we're going to have one walk out in the road, you know, and guns are going to be blaring, and it never happened, but you know, I thought for sure it was going to. But I stayed in contact with those guys, and anything that happened, I sent them the information, at least until I got out of the Army.
That's amazing, because I find out of everyone that I've spoken to over the years about Bigfoot encounters or anything that's kind of creepy, they either withdraw within themselves because it's so terrifying, or they're so intrigued they want to find out more.
Yeah, I would have never talked to anybody had I not met those two guys, and the state trooper by the name of Mark Pinninger, who was there, and some of the local men. I figured, you know, here's, you know, grown men, and I always looked up to, you know, in those days, you know, the manly men, you know, it was kind of in my DNA. I wanted to be when I was little, like, you know, the potty training was like, you know, it was one of my dad's friends. These guys were all World War II combat vets, right?
Oh, yeah.
And one of the guys, he's like, when, you know, I remember they were talking about, we need to make sure he gets no more diapers. The kid needs to be potty trained. So one day, one of the guys is like, "Bill, come on, we're going to go to the bathroom." And then from then on, that was it. There was no diapers, no anything. It was, you know, and I used to tell them when I was little, they wanted to call me Willie. And I said, "You call me Bill. I don't want to be called Willie." I named my dog Willie. I named my dog Willie, and my mom thought that was funny. She says, "Why'd you name that dog Willie?" Because she would mess with me. She'd go outside, and that's what she wanted to screw with me. She would call me that. I said, "So when you come outside and say Willie, the dog will come instead of me." She says, you're a smart so-and-so, you know.
Wow. That is pretty smart. Oh, gee. Actually, my grandfather was named Willie.
Well, you know, my last job, that's what they called me there. And I thought, yeah, whatever, you know.
Yeah.
But, you know, getting to know those guys got us going. You know, one of the first incidents we had, and we lived so far out. I mean, it's funny, the high school I went to was out in the middle of a pasture, and we all nicknamed it Cow Pie High because it was out like in a cow pasture, right?
Yeah.
So everybody lived kind of far flung from each other. So after we started school that fall in 75, I sat down and I had a group of friends. There were about 10 of us in the group. And we all, by this time, everybody knew what was happening. I called them and told them what was going on. And I said, well, they want us to help them. So has anybody heard anything weird going on in your area where you live? So one of the guys out by the town of Roy, he lived in the town of Roy, which is just the other side of Fort Lewis. He said, well, we knew the Clark family because they were their kids that went to school with us. He said, the Clarks have been hearing a bunch of weird screams going on. So I said, well, why don't you see if you can get permission for us to go out there and look around? So we did. And 3 of us rode to his house on the school bus. That's how we got around with our packs, and we hiked up the railroad tracks to the Clark Ranch. So we went out there, and the Clarks were like, oh yeah, it's going on out there. You guys can go out there, but we're not going out there. So we thought, okay, teenagers, off we go. And we always had the one obligatory flashlight that barely worked. So we didn't really have any lights. And we picked a spot at dusk to camp. And then the whole evening just evolved. We got surrounded by a group of these things. The screaming started right at dusk. One was relatively close to us, and then another one was responding to it maybe a quarter mile off. We estimate, I don't know if it was that far or not, but so they had an exchange going back and forth. And then periodically we could hear at least one of them circling us. And then at one point, one of the guys wanted to go to sleep. The rest of us were too on edge to go to sleep. And I told him, I said, well, I think we should all work in pairs. You know, 2 guys sleep, the other 2 awake all the time to keep an eye on what's going on. Mm-hmm. So it ended up just being the 3 of us sitting in front of the tent and one guy going in the tent. And he was twice the size of the rest of us. So after he was in there, maybe 20 minutes, we hear this rustling around. And of course, being disgusting teenage boys, you know, we're joking about what he may or may not be doing in the tent. So pretty soon, he almost tears the tent down coming out of there. And he says, it's not very dang funny, you guys grabbing me and trying to pull me out of the tent. And we're kind of looking up at him like this, you know. And I said, well, that's a great idea. It's too bad we didn't think of it, because if we had thought of it, we would have done it. But yeah. We were having a conversation in front of the fire. So I said, look, you probably fell asleep and were dreaming. No, I never went to sleep. I was laying there listening to your conversation. I said, okay, if something really happened, you know, tell us what happened. He says, well, I'm laying on my stomach and this hand reaches out just above his belt, grabs him and starts pulling him out of the tent. Now he was a big guy. So the hand, I said, okay, tell me where from the heel of the hand to the end of the fingers, show me on your back where this started and that stopped. And the hand would have been 1.5 feet long. So I said, okay, look, if this really happened, and I'm Mr. Skeptic, right? So mm-hmm. The tent didn't have a floor in it. So we walked, and I was kneeling down on the corner where he was, where this happened, supposedly. I said, okay, give me the flashlight. If the soil's pretty soft here, if there's something really happened, there's got to be something to show it. So we shined the light down, and sure enough, there were these footprints that were 18 inches long, and they went right off back into the forest in this big round bowl-like depression where something apparently had knelt down into the mm-hmm. soil, and it reached under the tent. He thought it was one of us trying to grab something out of the packs. And I said, no, we would have disturbed you and just walked over and got something out of the packs in the door.
Yeah.
So obviously there was one of these things there and was trying, maybe it thought it was getting something out of the packs itself, but it latched onto him. And then when he started squirming, it let go. And there was only one of us that actually saw the creatures that night, and we heard them. They were making noises around us constantly. It scared the hell out of us all night. And all we had was the fire light to keep us what we felt safe. It kept them at bay, apparently. So we made it through the night. We got out of there, and I wrote to John Green. I said, well, this is what happened. And a couple weeks later, he called. I got home from school, and he called, and he says, I'm in Seattle. I'll be at your house in about an hour. Can you take me out to the Clark Ranch? And I said, sure. So I called a couple of friends. I said, hey, Green's coming. Can we take him out there? And they said, sure. So he loads us up in his van when he comes, and we all go out there. We get there right at dusk. The Clark family, the whole family's out on their deck. We pull up, get out of the, no sooner we got out of the van than the screaming started, just bloody murder coming in from that direction. And we're all standing there silent, listening to this. And then pretty soon, after a few minutes, Green says, well, I got to get back home. We load up in the van, he drops us off. And then years later, probably 20 years later, I'm at Green's house, and he looks at me and he says, you know, I'm still kicking myself for not taking a recorder to the Clark Ranch. And I thought, what in the world did you come down there for? I told you in the letter what was going on there. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, him and Dahinden were both kind of like that. You know, I was really good at making contacts with people and finding stuff in those areas. And I would tell them, Rene was a good one in 89 in Southern Washington. We had I wrote a book about the situation called Haunted Valley. Mm-hmm. And I kept calling him and telling him, I said, hey, Rene, you know, because he always grumbled about not ever seeing a Bigfoot. I said, if you want to see one, you need to get down here right now, because most of the people on my field team have seen the things in here, the families, all the locals. I think I was one of the few people that didn't actually see one there. We saw the tracks, we heard them run, to do all kinds of stuff. But lots of people that were skeptics on my team had one walk right in front of him there. So he waited until the creatures had left the area and he never got to see one. And I said, well, I'm tired of telling you guys. That's part of it. I got tired of telling those guys. So then I really split off, and they were very limited in their thinking. I was always asking questions like, have you guys thought about this, why this kind of behavior occurs, or what this is what they're eating or doing? And they're always like, nah, yeah, we don't want to know that stuff. So I said, okay.
How can he not know? How can he not want to know that?
They were funny guys. I mean, now Green was a journalist, so his whole thing was really writing the books and doing that part. Rene was an odd guy. I mean, he was very intense, had a hell of a sense of humor. I mean, he could go from being, a grump to a jokester in a second. But he just didn't. He had a very narrow focus, and I think it's what prevented him from really getting that close to the creatures. And I took that as a lesson on how the two of them behaved, and I wanted to emulate the two of them as one person, but also be the opposite of what they were behaving like, if that makes any sense.
It does, yeah.
And I've been fairly successful at it. So, after 52 years, I'm still writing and still, producing shows, and we're making films now. We have one film that's been out. I think Adam put it out a year ago, maybe a little more. It's called Bigfoot Evidence, Oregon, and it's on Tubi and Amazon TV and some other outlets, and it's on a YouTube.
What's it called again?
Too.
Bigfoot
it's
Evidence,
called
you said?
Bigfoot Evidence, Oregon. It's actually it's titled William Jevning's Bigfoot Evidence, Oregon, and the next two films are just about finished. One of those is it's going to be Bigfoot Evidence Southwest and Bigfoot Evidence Navajo, something. I can't remember what the title is, but the first one, we didn't set out to make a film. My co-host Tom, who passed away last year.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Oh, thanks. It was prostate cancer, and unfortunately, I don't think he really took care of himself leading up to that, and it hit him. So we have some other people on the show now. One of our co-hosts in Canada, and he just got the all clear. He had the same cancer, and he was just cleared of it. So thankfully, Keith is 100% healthy now. But anyhow, so Tom lived in Eugene, Oregon, and the area east of him is the Three Sisters Wilderness. So they had, and that's how he got a hold of me originally, like 6 or 7 years ago, was because him and his wife had heard screaming up there when they were camping, and it really unnerved him. So we got to be very good friends, and he kept saying, hey, we need to go out there and start working this area. So we did go there in 2021, and it really warranted a more in-depth look. So the following summer, we brought our team in there, and Adam, my friend Adam, who's he's a Hollywood special effects guy. He's been there since 1984, so he's a kind of a fixture in Hollywood. Wow. So
yeah,
when you see pictures of J-Lo and Cardi B and people like that, he's the one that does a lot of the work, the touch-up work on those pictures. Yeah. So Adam's really great guy, super talented, and he's part of the team. So when he goes, I bought a professional grade camcorder about a year ago, and so he handles all the filming and the audio when we're out. And so he did a bunch of filming with another camera I had, but he said, well, why don't we make that into a movie? So I'm thinking, okay, and we did some extra pieces for it, and it came out okay. It's not what I had expected, because I wanted to put some other things into it. And he says, well, we can't do that because it's a documentary. And apparently when you do a documentary, it's different than other kinds of films. So you kind of have to stick with what you film yourself. You can't put other things into a documentary. So anyhow,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't either. I'm all new to all that stuff, but it's making more contacts. There's a friend of his that's currently making, what they're trying to do is make the best Bigfoot costume that's ever been done, the most accurate, and it's going to be for rent, for companies that want to make movies or whatever, and then we get to use it for free. So when we do,
nice.
he wants to do some reenactments in the next 2 films, which are just about finished. So that's kind of what we're doing. We've got a whole series of films planned, and largely it's, we want to educate people. I talked to a couple from New Zealand earlier today, and it's going to be on that show is going to air the 1st of March on Creek Devil. And it wasn't that the gentleman saw the creatures, but what we gather, it sounds like he was interrupting a hunt with the creatures because they had these whoopings going on 3 different sides of him. And there's a lot of feral pigs there, and that's what he was hunting. So he went up there, and the dog didn't want to go. So he ended up having the dog acted up 3 different times trying to get him out of there. So he decided because he listens to the show regularly. So he said, well, as much as I learned from you guys, I figured I better pay attention. And he was fortunately got out safe. So that's my thing is I want people to be safe.
That could be really dangerous, interrupting a hunt.
It can be, absolutely. And it does happen. Things happen. And I said, well, probably had you gone any further, the next thing you would have experienced was rocks or sticks being thrown at you.
Yeah.
And that's a typical primate behavior. When they don't want you there, they throw things. I was even, I shouldn't say it, I was chuckling with Tom once. I said, the only thing I haven't heard yet, which is a very strong primate character, you hear about this all the time, where chimps and gorillas, right? They throw their poop at people in zoos. And I thought, well, a lot of Bigfoot behavior is very primate-like. You do comparative anthropology, and you can see almost a one-to-one behavior with different behaviors. And lo and behold, not long after we had that discussion, somebody contacted me. And the poor guy, I really feel for him because it was a terrifying experience, but the Sasquatch threw a big pile of its own crap at him and hit him in the chest. And it was a powerful experience. It hurt him. And oh yeah.
I've never heard of that before. That's amazing.
Oh yeah. That's the only time I've heard of it. But I thought, just when I'm thinking I expect certain things within a short time frame, here we come across something like that. We spent a couple of weeks up on the Navajo reservation in October. One of my team members is Navajo, and he invited us up there. Really fascinating place, and people super nice. So we went up in an area called the Chusca Mountains, and there's a pass called the Narbonne Pass that divides the north from the south. And local native police and every single person we talked to there had at least one sighting of the creatures. It was incredible. And they were all very, very serious about it. And they told us, the police officer said, well, you guys need to go up to the Narbonne Pass and go to this area. So we went up to the, on the south side of the pass of the Chuscas, and we spent, I don't know, probably 40 miles up in that country. And there's virtually nobody up there. Of course, you're on the reservation, and there's really no outsiders. So the local natives, the ones that are up there, I think on the south side, we saw some woodcutters, but that's about it. Lots of wild horses, lots of game. We found long lines of bear tracks and lots of mountain lion tracks, lots of mountain lion tracks, more than I've ever seen in a location before, but no Bigfoot sign. So I was a little disappointed. So I said, well, let's try the north side. So, which is a matter of making a right or a left off the highway that divides the pass up there. And when we started going in the north side, that's where we started finding stuff. And what's interesting, things like, normally the territorial markings where they break trees. We did find some older ones. Typically, when there's activity, that'll be fairly fresh. When the creatures are in a location, you'll see that. For instance, when we were in the Three Sisters Wilderness, I was showing the team, Tom took us into an area where the people had said they'd seen these things. We found the markings. So there was one day we wanted to go 30 miles away to a Boy Scout camp, and then we had to drive through the forest to get over there. So I told everybody in the team, I said, do me a favor. I want you to look at this, and as we're going over there, don't talk about it. Just count how many of these tree breaks you see. So when we get all the way there, not one person saw a single one. And I said, now what you don't see is as important as what you do see, because if this was natural, you would have counted a number of these along the way. And interestingly enough, by the Boy Scout camp, we did find a couple over there that were fresh. So, and these attach themselves, to sightings and things in the area. So when we got to the Navajo reservation, we drove quite a ways into the north side of the Chusca Mountains before we actually found fresh ones. But other things were interesting, like, and Adam was filming. He filmed so much. He says, we have so much stuff on film. It's incredible. Just the sheer amount of film. So he filmed the entire way. He's sitting in the back of my Jeep, and he's poor guy. He's bouncing around, filming everything we're doing. But, and I'm trying, drive so we're not, and it's rough country. So, and thankfully I have a Jeep to get in there. So, one day we drove in, and we'd been in there a couple times on this one particular road. So the tree line is about 100 feet away from the road. And here's a horse carcass. I mean, it's all bones, but it was still articulated. In other words, the bones were all still connected as one piece. Mm-hmm. It was not there the day before. And we're thinking, and we went back and reviewed the film to make sure. And sure enough, the day before, there's nothing next to the road there. And it's about 40 feet between us and the tree line. Bleached white bones, you couldn't miss it, stuck out like a sore thumb. And we're thinking, how in the hell did that get here overnight? Mm-hmm. So we hiked back into the timber, and there were probably one or two other horses that were disarticulated. In other words, the bones were all scattered. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing about that was, porcupines will chew on bones, and other animals, will chew bones. Not one of those bones had chew marks on them. And we're trying to figure that out. But then the local, the Indians we ran into would say, no, there's an old white Sasquatch that lives up here year round and eats horses. So we're thinking, trying to put two and two together, think, well, maybe that was some kind of a message, it brought this whole horse carcass out and set it there. And you could see where it had been placed down on the grass. Maybe that was some kind of a message that maybe we shouldn't be poking around up there.
Yeah.
We stopped at one point, and Don, our Navajo guy, he's a fun guy, young guy, and he every time we'd run across somebody or slow down, he'd jump out of the Jeep and go running off somewhere. Usually to talk to people that we'd run into. A lot of the pinion pickers were out at that particular time, who were a wealth of information too. So one time he jumps out, and he liked to go into the brush and do a quick search, and then he'd come back out. So Adam and I are kind of looking at him, scratching our heads. And we're like, okay, we could use a leg stretch here. So Don runs off to the timber, and he hollers back, and he says, hey, come and look what I found. So we go over to the tree line, and it's, a couple hundred yards off the road. And what was interesting, and I've seen this before, I have pictures of it, where Sasquatches have hung animals in trees, right? Usually bones by the time they're found. Mm-hmm. So what he found was this, and I don't know, and it's different in different states how they count the antlers on a deer. Where I grew up in Washington, you just count one side. So what we found was this male deer, the buck, a 4-point by Washington standards, so eight antler points total, with the skull. It was 6 or 7 feet off the ground. I can't remember. I measured it, but the antlers are jammed into this tree, facing up into the timber. And then Don proceeds to tell us what Navajo do and don't do with their deer kills. This was not a Navajo kill. And then up in the timber there, we did find a couple of the really dramatic tree breaks. So we chalk that up to the creatures doing this. And then we had we run into a lot of people. So every time, like I said, Don would jump out when he'd pass a vehicle, he'd jump out and talk to the people. One of these times, there was a family in the truck. So they invited us to their place up there that evening to talk. They were going to talk to us on camera. So Adam was excited. He was going to film a family, up there, their encounters. And the old man apparently was the one we wanted to talk to, but he wasn't available. He'd had a lot of experiences, but this family did also, his children. And one of the creatures, they'd even nickname it George. It came around so often. And I'll be doggone, it was right below a place called Twin Buttes. Heavy timber up there. I tried to get up there during the day with my Jeep, and the ruts were so deep in the road, the Jeep was it was impassable. So we went back that evening to talk to him. And what was interesting to me was they had some their young daughters. Whenever they would get out of the vehicles for anything, usually to open your closed gates or whatever they're doing, they would sling their rifles over their shoulders like they were expecting something.
Oh.
And I told Adam, I said, look at this. Isn't that interesting? And he says, yeah, that's really odd. We didn't see that with anybody else. So we get up to their Hogan, and it was cold as hell up there. And thankfully they had a big roaring fire in there. So I'm, talking to the rest of the family, the ladies, and Adam's filming the gentleman and his youngest daughter. So when they were all done, we went outside, and I can't remember his name offhand, but the man of the house, he went outside and he did a couple of these, I guess what you'd call a war cry up towards Twin Buttes. And within 2 minutes, these things started whistling down back at us. And he says which is what natives say. They whistle, and it sounds like a person whistling. There's no people up there. That was such a remote area. And another family, and then we got all that recorded, so that's going to be in that particular film. And then they came down and circled us. You could hear them going loud, crunch, 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 just inside the tree line. They wouldn't cross the fence. The family said they won't come in the yard, but they'll come down to the fence. And they also had a travel trailer up the trail a ways. And he told us about an incident where apparently one of these things, whether it was George or another one, came down, had big muddy handprints. And the window, he motioned how wide this window was in the side of the trailer. And he put his arms out like this. And he was a pretty big guy, so his arms spread out quite a ways. And he said another hand width outside of his is where these muddy handprints were on the trailer. And he sent us the picture he had of that. And here's these big muddy handprints on the side of the trailer. So it was pretty interesting. And then we ran into we got word about this one family. And apparently the matriarch of the family had lots of stories that she was willing to talk about. So, and it always cracked me up about the directions. They'd say, you go up this road a ways and you turn at the big rock, and it sounds like something out of a Western, right? And I'll be doggone if their directions weren't right spot on. So we drove right to this family's home, and the son and the daughter, they were both military veterans. So being a military veteran, I got along pretty well with them.
Yep.
And the lady, she did have some stories, but it was mostly tribal information. But the two young people, now the girl, she acted like she wanted to talk, but she didn't. But the son did. He had a very interesting account. Two things he told us. One was they would stay up there year round. Normally the Navajo, they have their houses near towns, and then they have their kind of like homesteads out. And usually by October, so they close them up and they go back. They don't go out there for the winter because they get snowed in. So these people stayed year round. They had a sustainable place. So they had a heavy snow one year. And he said the snow was about 3 feet deep, plus all these snow drifts. So he had to go out. They got a grader that came in and cleared the road. So he thought, well, while we're able to, I'm going to get the truck, go to town, grab some extra supplies, and come back. So, but his truck had a flat tire. So he took the 60-pound air tank, and he's wading through the snow out to this thing. And by this time, it's snowing again. Well, he gets to the truck, and then this blood-curdling scream comes from about 100 yards out. And he knew what it was. Mm-hmm. So he said, "To hell with the tire and the truck." And he's he says, "I'm trying," and he's kind of a skinny guy. He's a runner. So he said, "I'm trying to go as fast as I can, wading through this 3-foot snow plus the drifts back to the house." And the screams kept getting closer behind him.
Oh.
So he got back to the house in time, and he just thought, "Nope, I'm not going out there again." He can have the truck and the air tank and everything. So on another time, they went and there was and it's interesting because they because there's so few people out there, they take note of who is out there, whoever comes on the road. Like when we came up in Don's van, they're thinking, well, who's up here in a minivan in this area? So they saw this truck come in, towing a trailer with what he said looked like this very big coffin on the trailer. And it come to find out it was it was either Forest Service or Navajo Rangers, one of the two. So they went on, and he's out there in the tall grass. He was going to go find out who it was. Then he thought, no, I'm going to wait and see. So he hunkered down in the tall grass just to watch, unnoticed. And after a bit, hear this truck and trailer come back, but the door on the coffin wouldn't close. And he saw what was in there. It was a Sasquatch that was in there, kind of a light brown color, part of its arm and head sticking out. And he just sat there and he watched it go. Well, the story apparently was the people who lived up the road around where they couldn't see from them. This thing was at their corral trying to get at their animals, and the two guys killed it. And they called the Navajo Rangers, who the following day came out and retrieved this thing. But beyond that, as far as any information, nobody's talking about it.
That's amazing. I've heard.
There was some.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say there's a lot of really interesting stuff that's been coming out of there. We're going back up there this summer because I interviewed an EMT from up there, and these people all had a bunch of pictures they took of these things. And they told me, they said, "Oh yeah, no, come on up here. We'll take you out there." And they're here all the time. So I'm kind of excited to see what happens this summer.
Do you know how many are there?
We have no idea yet. Another thing that was funny too, Don, he got a text one night, and he says, one of the things we hadn't gotten was any screaming. So he gets this text from the northern part of the reservation up towards Flagstaff, Arizona. And he said, well, there's one up here that's screaming like crazy. So 2-hour drive, we drove up there 2 hours, waited around about an hour listening, didn't hear anything. So we make the 2-hour drive back. We get back to the hotel we were staying at in this little town. And I go upstairs to my room, and Adam and Don, they're still downstairs. And no sooner than I got my room, now we'd been back there 8 minutes because I looked at my watch, and I get this text saying, "Come outside." So I'm walking towards the door of my hotel room, and I hear this screaming coming through the wall. It was that loud. So I opened the door, and just across the highway where there was an interpreter, because this was around 1 a.m. The interpreter center was closed, and there's nobody over there. And from on top of the mesa that run behind it, this thing was up there just screaming like a son of a gun. And it annoyed the people in town. It happened so often. There were people honking their horns and stuff trying to get it to shut up. So this went on for well over an hour. Adam was out there recording it and stuff. In fact, it got to the point where he just put one of the recorders on the tire in the wheel well of my Jeep and went into his hotel room because he didn't want to stay out there that long. I said, well, let it record, see what we get. But I said, well, here we spent 5 hours to go get screaming. We could have stayed right here at the hotel.
Yeah, no kidding.
and we knew coming in there, you have to drive. Well, at least I did, coming from southern New Mexico. I had to drive through the town of Gallup, and they had going on at that time what locals were calling the Gallup Screamer. Well, the mesa that this thing came on sort of runs into that one, and it's about, I don't know how many miles, probably 30 miles, but the town people said, oh yeah, this thing comes in here every 2 or 3 days and gives the town hell, then he wanders off. But it's all very common stuff to those people up there.
Normally people would be shaking in their skivvies, wondering, what the heck is that? And these people are just like, what? Shut up.
They're annoyed. Yeah, they're annoyed. Like, God, you have to come in here and do it again. Come in once in a while, but you got to do it every couple of days. Give us a break.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow.
And like I said, even the police there were like, oh yeah, this happens all the time. Go and look at this area or that, and I never, something I had kind of a hard time with is, especially in social media, you see people putting these ornate structures that they're claiming are Bigfoot. And my brain automatically is thinking, it's total baloney. There's nothing, there's no footprints. I mean, if you're going to take the time to make something, there's going to be a lot of sign around it, right? So if you can convince me, with all the attendant evidence, and I'll take a serious think about it. So we were up one day, like we were every day, looking at different areas that the locals were telling us to go to, and we find this family picking pinon nuts off the side of the road. So Don jumps out to talk to them. What they had found was really interesting. They said they told us to go down, and they told us how to find this particular road. There was a rubber tire marking by the entrance. They said, go up that road about a quarter mile, and what you're going to see, what they told us what they found. They went up there and they found these 2 structures just inside the tree line. And in the smaller structure was an infant Sasquatch. He said it was reddish brown color. It was awake. It was laying there very quietly. It wasn't making any noise. And this is, the parents and the kids, everybody was there looking at this until Mama stuck its head out of the brush and scared the hell out of them. They all took off running.
Yeah.
So they said, walk up there, go up there and you'll see this. So we find the road, and I parked the Jeep off the side of the road in the timber. So Adam and I walked up the road, and Don, they said they heard one growl at him 45 minutes prior. So he's off in the brush going that direction. So Adam and I walked up the road. We get about a quarter of a mile, didn't see anything. So I said, well, people, it's hard judging distance. So let's just keep walking. We walked about a mile up that road. And these are all, seldom used roads, these little tiny, like, I don't know what you call them, like skidder roads or whatever. But pretty soon we did find a small structure, very rudimentary kind of a thing, and the beginnings of a larger one next to it. So I said, well, look at this. And I thought, well, what clicked in my brain, we were scratching our heads, trying to figure out why they would do something like that. And it's nothing these ornate things. Again, it's going to be in the third film. So if you're going to make something like that, now we had actually, I guess I should back up. On one of the other areas, we did find this structure, and it was, more like a lean-to kind of a thing with a lot of boards. And it was right by where natives had cut wood. So I'm thinking, maybe they're stacking these limbs up to come back next year. And when they're dry, when they're cured, and pick them up. But then I thought, well, we've seen that in a lot of places where they've cut wood and they just leave the big branches. They don't care. So I thought, that's not that, because we've seen this all over the place. They don't do that. Well, after we found this structure and the family who saw the Sasquatches there and the infant using it, and then the other guy who said, well, there's an old one up here that, they eat horses. I thought, well, if there's, if a mother's got an infant, it's not going to go try chasing down 1,000-pound horse with an infant in one arm. What's it going to do with the infant while it's hunting? Well, you make a little lean-to and stick the infant in it. And you can go off and kill the horse and come back and get the infant. That's, at least to me, that's what made sense.
Kind of like a Bigfoot playpen.
Yeah, kind of like that. I mean, and it's interesting that these people were right there. I mean, within 5 feet of the thing, looking at it, and he said it laid there very still, very quiet, which makes sense. Infants in the wild of anything, when there's potential threats around, are going to be very still. They're not going to move, and it just made sense to me. It wouldn't leave it out there in the open, but it was such a rudimentary kind of a structure. It just thought, okay, now I can accept that. These big ornate things that people claim they find just smell of baloney to me. But this one made a whole bunch of sense. And then we had witnesses that saw it. So I have to say and they told us, they said the ones they found had been taken down and scattered. This was a different one, deeper into the area. So we saw lots of things and heard lots of things. We did find tracks at one point. Unfortunately, the weather was bad, so they got rained in pretty good, but they were still 14-inch tracks, that were the outside, the perimeter is clearly defined. And
how deep do you know?
They were 3 inches deep. I measured them. And the wild horses only sunk in an inch or less in that same material.
And horses are not light.
No, they're not light. So, I mean, when you look at the pictures, like, yeah, it's pretty, the toe prints weren't clear, but you could tell that's exactly what it was. And they went across this road, and the pinion picker traffic had wiped out most of them, but you could still see with the indentations where they, the left, right going across this open area. But it was very interesting and definitely worth a trip back there.
That's amazing. I would love someday to go on, just to go look for them. I think at one point, the team that I'm with for paranormal investigations, we did encounter something, but we just heard a loud crash in the wooded area. And we did have little pebbles and things being thrown at us earlier that night.
Wow.
But we were there investigating ghosts, so we didn't put two and two together. I jokingly said, let's go look for Bigfoot. And then later on, it's just like, wait a minute. So, yeah.
Yeah, the locals were telling us when they were throwing rocks, it was like baseball-sized rocks, and
Oh,
I
wow.
said, "Yeah, it
Yeah.
wasn't pebbles; these were baseball-sized rocks."
Yeah. Gee.
But the locals were very informative. I mean, very helpful, and which was great. I mean, a lot of times you
That's
go
good.
places and
They're tight-lipped.
you don't get that, but yeah, very much so. And we've
Yep.
been working on Don, especially because he wants to open it up to the tribes, to get them to talk to each other about this stuff. And here's an interesting thing too. At that time of year, they do a ceremony, and I forget how it went, but because we were trying to find a medicine man who would actually let us film him talking about the ceremony. But the ceremony basically was, for that time of year, the women and children would run and hide, and the men would give some kind of a offering for these things not to come in and eat the women and children. And Don was telling us he was giving us a lesson all the time in Navajo, the language. And he said each Navajo word is essentially 3 words. So the name, what they would call these creatures, and I can't remember what the other 2 parts were, but the first word was Yeti, just like in the Himalayas.
Yeah.
And I said, isn't that coincidental? And he says, yeah, when we were kids, they used to say, if you dig in the dirt too far, you're going to end up in Nepal, not China, in Nepal of all places.
That's interesting.
And I said, there has to be an ancient connection with Asia. And he says, yeah, we think so too. But Yeti, the same term in Nepal is used.
Now, isn't that interesting? I didn't know that.
It was fascinating. I'd never heard that either. But, they don't talk to outsiders about this stuff. So what we're working on now is creating this network among different tribal groups so everybody can sort of talk to each other. And we've been interviewing different people. We interviewed a guy from the Blackfoot tribe, and we're going to be talking to some other folks in the San Diego area. There's like 5 different tribal groups there, and I can't remember which one they're affiliated with offhand, but we've had several people from the Apache tribe. One of them was an Apache police officer, and it cracked me up because he says, and we knew this from the Navajo that, they all won't go out on these calls. If they know it's a Bigfoot call, they won't go. And if somebody does, then that person gets saddled with all of those calls. So this guy gets all these calls. But he was very interesting. We recorded him for one of the shows, and we're hoping to talk to his partner. Also had some other, he had some different experiences with the things up on their land. But, and I do have another Apache gentleman who sends me stuff every once in a while, periodically, not regular, but he sent me some pictures in January where he had these 18-inch tracks going right down by his house in the snow. And it shook him up pretty good because they were so close to his house.
Yeah.
That would shake me up too, I think, if I had one that big. No, I wouldn't either.
Well, Will, this was amazing. We could go on for hours. I would definitely like to have you back. Yes. I would definitely like to have you on again. But for the audience, could you tell them just a little bit about Creek Devil and where they can find it?
Well, Creek Devil I put out. Okay. You can look at my website, williamjevning.com. We also have one for the show, creekdevil.com. Since Tom passed, we haven't updated that. He was the one taking care of that, and I don't have access into it, but you can look at my website. But we have a Facebook group called the JRG Bigfoot Research Group, where I think we're around 4,300 members currently. It's not the nonsense. Everybody's, very common sense on that site. Good. So I'm very proud of that. People will pick things apart instead of just saying, they'll see something saying, oh, that's Bigfoot. No, they want to know details. So that's, I'm very happy about that. We have our film, of course, Bigfoot Evidence Oregon, and you can just type that into a search and you'll see it on Tubi or wherever else it's currently at. We have 2 more coming out soon. Of course, Creek Devil is on YouTube, and I think we're getting close to 1,000 shows uploaded.
Wow, that's a lot.
I put 6 out a week. Saturday sort of that's where I put the new interviews, and then we do Monday and Friday, or we have so many new people. I put some of the older shows out so they can hear those, and everybody's like, wow, we didn't know this is out there. So I do that. And then Tuesdays is Campfire Talk, That's where anybody who wants to join us, they can get a hold of me at wjevning@gmail.com. And if you want to sit in and chat with us, that's what we do. We just kind of toss whatever around that we want to talk about.
Nice.
Thursday is we do a Bigfoot breakdown and the Q&A. Those are two different shows. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what we do. We're growing, and not a huge number. We're over 20,000 subscribers, but it's growing. And
nice.
People are always saying, God, we love your show because, we wanted to know if we get in a situation, what do we do? And that's one of the things we try to do. We try to help people. And I don't know, I can't tell you how many people I've interviewed, thousands of them. Many of them come back and say, we needed to get that off our shoulders. And it's hard if you see one of these things. I've had, I don't know, a number of people who were combat vets that have told me combat paled in comparison with running into one of these things.
That's
and
wild.
They were so grateful to just get it off their shoulders. I've had people, one of the guys made me this beautiful carving of a mask of one of these things, just as a way to say thanks.
Nice.
And I'm lucky people do nice things for me. So
yeah. Well, you're a great guy. Why wouldn't they?
But we, the whole idea is to help people out, to get it off your shoulders and kind of put it in perspective. And
bring awareness that other people. Yeah, just bringing awareness. Sorry, go ahead.
Exactly. Educating people and trying to bring some awareness out there. I want, these things are not nice creatures a lot of times. And I want people to know what they can do to stay safe out there.
Yeah.
And the methods always work. They've always worked.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Will. No.
You're welcome.
Because if you do go alone and something happens, not just Sasquatch related, if something
could
happens,
be anything.
they don't know. Well, yeah.
Yeah. If you break your leg or something, I mean, could die of hypothermia. Well, there was a couple of guys in Southern Washington recently that died from hypothermia. Yeah. They were out Bigfoot hunting. And, and that's an area you should not die of hypothermia in that area. Skamania County is not that far away from where you can get help. They should never have been in that situation, but so it's raising awareness.
Yep. To help so many people. Well, thank you again. I always love talking to you. We'll try not to make it so long next time.
Absolutely. Just let me know when you want me to come on.
Anytime. Thank you. So you take care.
You too.
Well, folks, that's another episode of Paranormal Heart. Thank you to my special guest tonight and UPRN 107.7 New Orleans. Remember, if you enjoyed the show, please like, share, and subscribe. Now, folks, I'd love for you to send me your encounters with Bigfoot, if you had any. Doesn't matter if you saw them, if you heard them, what. I would like to hear anything that you've had about Bigfoot so that you can email me at paranormalheart13@gmail.com. Until next time, take care of each other. Much love to you all.